All right, let's continue with our special topics on research ethics. This is the second part of topic 4, federal regulations and IRB. We have talked about the federal regulations, the Bellman Report, and the APA Code of Ethics. Another very important component of um, ethical practices of social and natural science research, at least in the US and actually in many parts of the world, is the IRB, standing for the Institutional Review Board. Um, we can say with great confidence that all US research institutions are universities who are primarily charged with doing research as well as teaching. So UH is actually a research institution. Harvard, of course, is, and many other universities in this country. Um, I think they're required by law to have an institutional review board. In some places, they have something equivalent, panels that are not called RB, but by other names, such as the Human Subjects Committee at the University of California, Santa Barbara. That's where I got my PhD. But anyway, so a U.S. research institution must have something um, that can fulfill the function of RB, and the function of RB is actually to oversee all the ethical aspects of social and natural scientific research at this particular university. What they will do is they will review um, applications or proposals of research. We can take a quick look, maybe by going to the UHRB to take a quick look. So this is the homepage of the UHIRB. So the IRB, the board, will meet across the year monthly to review research applications and proposals. So as it says here, UH has 3 internal institutional review boards serving different purposes, right? So they have the biomedical RB, which is in charge of clinical research, and social and behavioral science RB. These are in the fields of psychology, education, sociology, and communicology. So when I and other professors from this department would like to do a research study that involves human subjects, then we're required to submit our proposal research plan to this particular RB. And UH has a third RB, which is cooperative RB. That is when a research project is requiring the collaboration or cooperation among different universities, including the UH, right? UH and other institutions, then these research projects, if they're federally funded, will be reviewed by this particular IRB. One thing to note is that these institutional review boards, IRBs, are not just for UH Manoa, but it's system at a system level. The IRB members typically consist of professors from different departments. They serve on the board voluntarily, and of course the board or the research office, right? The Office of Research Compliance They do have specialists working, sustaining the daily operations. But when research proposals comes in, the professors from different departments will convene and review those proposals. So we here have training modules. We have the protocol entrance side. Where will it? It's still loading. Still loading. We can come back later. Here is to submit a new protocol, to modify a protocol, to renew one if you do not finish your protocol within the proposed time period, and once you're done, you're supposed to file a closing report. If there are issues with your protocol, then you need to report it here. These are templates of informed consent, debriefing forms, and here you can find the policy guidelines, FAQs, etc. Here will be particularly interesting for you guys as typically research participants. So you do have rights, and your rights are described here on this page. You're actually belonging to the protected class of people in this university as research participants, and as such you have rights. And if you feel that your rights are violated, then you can go to this page or just directly contact the RRB, and everything of course will be confidential, and they will take it from there. Alright, so still loading, and then we might just kill it. Okay, let's go back here. So as I just said, the main responsibility of IRB is to review research plans or proposals, as we usually call it. Turns out that there are 3 types of reviews that IRB will conduct. The first one is what we call an exempt review. Second one is expedited review, and the third is a full board review. And we'll go through them one by one. Exempt review does not mean that your study does not have to be reviewed. It simply means, it means 2 things. First of all, your study must be reviewed. Second, the study is reviewed by only one IRB member. Exam review is as such because it typically is conducted in established educational settings such as university. Actually, quite a proportion of the COMG SONA studies or psych studies that you ever participated in is actually exempt. Went through exam review because first of all, they're conducted here, right, in the department, in an educational setting that is commonly accepted. The second criterion of whether a study qualifies for exam review is whether or not the research uses anonymous or no risk tests, surveys, interviews, or observations. It means that this particular research study only involves the use of validated questionnaires, asking questions that are non-sensitive, asking questions that are non-personal, does not involve disclosing sensitive issues or issues that are potentially traumatic to participants, or the research project involves interviews that does not review personal identities, or observations that do not intervene with participants' daily activities. So as long as all these tests, surveys, interviews, observations, all these interventions involve very, very low or even no risk, and these interventions or activities are going to happen in an educational setting, then this research project will qualify as exam to review, reviewed by only one IRB member, and typically is the fastest. I mean, in terms of the turnaround time. Another type of project that would typically qualify as exam review will be research involving public officials. The next type of research project that would qualify as exam review will be studies that involve the collection or study of existing data. That is, you're not, as a researcher, you're not collecting data on your own, but you're using data that are previously collected by other researchers. For example, the US government actually provided many useful and valuable data on, for example, life expectancy, and there are many other research agencies such as the Pew Public Opinion Research Center, and there are many other institutions in this country that will conduct survey studies annually, and they actually make their data publicly available. So as long as in those data, the subjects that, for example, the Pew Center interviewed do not identify their subjects, that is, everything is anonymous, and those data are publicly available, then researchers will be allowed to use those data for their own projects. And if that's the only or majority of the components of the researcher's project, then that particular project will also qualify as exam review. Lastly, research projects that examine public benefits or service programs will qualify as exam review. I guess that's because that's for the social welfare. The second type of review is expedited review. Expedited review and full board review, which we'll be talking about in a minute, are conducted when the risks are larger than minimal. Recall previously, research project will go through exam review if there is minimum or no risk, as judged by IRB members. But if, for example, the research study involves self-disclosure on personal and very sensitive topics, or they ask very sensitive questions, or the research involves active deception, that would make the study potentially riskier than it is beneficial, and that will require reviews that are more careful and thorough than the exam review. So expedited review does not necessarily mean that it is faster, but it simply means that it's going to be a review conducted by the IRB chair and one or more experienced reviewers. So it's not going to be full board, which consists of, according to my memory, 6 and sometimes even 7 members. But if the research project is expedited, then perhaps 2 members, including the chair, or the chair plus 2 other members, will be enough. So there are also several criteria for research projects that qualify for expedited review. First of all, if the risk is minimum, right? So for exam review, there should be no risk, but for expedited review, then the risk will be minimum. So maybe the topic is somewhat sensitive, somewhat personal, but not very personal, not very sensitive, and there perhaps is no deception involved, and perhaps there's no extensive manipulation of psychological moods involved. Right, there we go, right? So there's no deception, everything is very straightforward. For example, please fill out this questionnaire, it will take you 20 minutes, and there are no other twists or other elements that are not reviewed at the start of the study. And of course, for exempt and expedited review, the subjects must be those subjects that are commonly usable, so to speak, or the subjects should not come from populations that are vulnerable. So whenever using infants, using minors, using pregnant women, using prisoners, using homeless, for example, whenever using subjects from those vulnerable and sensitive populations, then your study must go to full board review, because there are simply too much risks involved working with those populations. Lastly, full board review, right? So if your study does not qualify for exempt or expedited review, then your study will go to full board review. That is, your study has more than minimum risks. Again, what is minimum is IRB usually has a standard that are more or less universal, but certainly the IRB of a particular university has definitely its own discretion in judging the extent to which a risk is minimum or more than minimum. But anyway, so this is the sort of a general principle, right? If a board deems your research project to have more than minimum risks, then your project will go to full board reviewed. Situations that involve more than minimum risks will be your study entails intentional deception, right? For example, you're trying to study the effect of, I don't know, lighting conditions on people's psychological moods, but then you're afraid that if you tell participants the true purpose of the study, participants might behave differently. So you tell them a lie saying that, well, this is just a study on pretesting the physical environment of a project that will unfold later on. So once you're hiding your true purposes, right, or tell people otherwise, then you're intentionally deceiving others, even though that's probably for a good reason or for a justifiable reason. A second criterion for your study to go to full board is when you're using subjects from sensitive or protected or vulnerable populations, or your study proposes to use procedures that are personally intrusive. For example, if you're injecting adrenaline to people, which were actually frequently done in the past, then definitely your study will go to full board. Even though you're saying that, even though what you're actually injecting might not be harmful or is approved by FDA, but still, whenever you're, using intrusive measures or procedures, there's no chance your study will go to exam review or expedited review, or you require participants to do intense physical work that will be physically stressful, or you ask participants recall traumatic experience in the childhood. For example, recall the last time when your parents quarreled with each other. That will be qualified as psychological stress. So all these stresses and traumatic experiences, are not limited to physical, but also to psychological aspects of the participants. So whenever your study involves any one or more than one of these elements, your study will go to full board review. Regardless of the type of review that your study will go through, exempt, expedited, or full board, informed consent is always required. That is, you have to tell your prospective participants what this study is about. We'll be talking about the format and content of informed consent in the future classes, but just so remember that your study may go through exam review, may go through expedited review, but informed consent is always required. A debriefing consent is required when your study went through full board review, especially when deception is used. That is, in the consent form, you might be allowed, upon the approval of RRB, to allow to participants not to disclose your true purpose of study, or tell them a fake purpose of the study. You can do that upon RRB approval, but RRB will require you at the end of the study to review the true purpose of the study. So that's called a debriefing consent. Another important purpose of giving or administrating debriefing consent is to let participants have to protect their rights, because some participants might be offended upon learning that they were lied to. So typically in the debriefing consent form, participants will be given a choice to opt out the study despite that they have completed the study. So participants will be asked, okay, so now you have learned the true purpose of the study. Would you allow the researcher to use your data? They can say yes, they can say no, and regardless of the answer, they will not be penalized, right? So that's the two consent forms. One is always required. The other is required when your study involves deception. Okay, so that, and in sum, those are the three types of reviews that your research project might go through, depending on the amount of risks. And of course, how to decide the risks, we'll be talking about that in the next class, assessing potential risks. All right, see you later.